Hi, this is Glen Mowrer, and we're doing a show today on the next step and a continuation of a series of programs we've done occasionally over the last few years on American politics, with the idea of the show being, let's look at some of the minor American political movements or people outside the two-party Democratic-Republican mainstream power system, and investigate what these programs are about and why the folks involved in them continue to make the effort to pursue a political agenda that some people don't even know about, to be honest. I personally might mention, and maybe if you know it, I'm a Green candidate, and this show has ostensible Green history roots. Bette Booth, who was here before, was Green, and others. I was a candidate for State California Attorney General as a Green party member a few years ago. So it's not, I'm not unbiased in this discussion, but I think we're going to have a little conversation with two people who are knowledgeable about the Green Party US, and we're lucky to have them with us. One is John Foran. John is at UCSB, and he's a professor of sociology and environmental science, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And he, in his capacity in this particular presentation, he is a faculty advisor or mentor to the UCSB Green student organizations. And John has been longtime active in Santa Barbara County Green politics. I've run into him a few times over the last few decades, trying to keep our viability in the community. The other guest tonight is today on the show is Ben Manski. Ben Manski is an attorney, although I'm told he's not currently practicing.
That's right.
And to me, what I thought was pretty interesting, he's the founder of the Liberty Tree Foundation. And under the Liberty Tree Foundation is the group which I am a big fan of right now, Move to Amend. So I thank you for that.
You bet, you bet. Thank you for being a fan, supporting it.
And Ben is a longtime Green also. He, as I understood it, joined the Wisconsin Green Party back in 1990, so you've been involved quite a while.
Yeah, most of my life.
And from a national point of view, in 1999 he was involved with Ralph Nader. You were helping run his campaign?
I was the Midwest field director. For
the Ralph Nader for President campaign when he ran as Green. And then you were co-chair of the U.S. Green Party from 2003 and 4.
2001 through 2004. I was actually elected here in Santa Barbara. The national meeting was here.
Oh.
It's my first time out here, and I was just amazed. I was just looking at the email I sent my dad about this community. So I have fond memories from that.
So, you know, we have some heavy-duty national and local Green Party history here. We have 10, 20 years. And we're going to try to go through this and talk a little bit about the philosophy of the Green Party and what it does. By the way, the show is going to air, as it always does, on cable channel 17 in Santa Barbara on cable television, and then it will also be streamed on Ustream and hopefully on YouTube, although we had a few problems recently with YouTube downloads. I'm not sure why, but we'll try to have it on both YouTube and Ustream and cable 17. So let's talk about the history of the Green Party real briefly. It rose in the late 1980s or so in, as I recall it, New Zealand. It's sort of credited with being a home of the environmental movement that became known as Greens.
I can go back further. I can go back to, what year was it, 1984 maybe, in Berkeley, where I was a graduate student. And I remember being in some meetings with a small group of people who later became quite prominent in the Green Party, Danny Moses, and not too far away, Charlene Spretnak. This was early meetings in Berkeley of interested people discussing the formation of local Green Party politics.
And it was called Green Party.
Yeah, and they took it, they kept going with it, and I dropped out for a while. So yeah,
I was curious because I thought the first use of the word Green Party as a title of a political party was out of the German national parties.
Yeah, there was the Ecology Party in New Zealand in the 70s, and then the Greens emerged in Germany in the late 70s, and there was also the Green Belt movement of Wangari Maathai in Kenya. So there was a number of places around the world where you saw a politics, a philosophy that was emerging for some of the same reasons in very different soils, right? And as John was saying, people in the U.S. were following what was happening in Germany in particular, and were inspired by that. And there were a number of places across the United States where there were early organizing meetings. So California, Wisconsin, and Maine are really the three states that vie over where the Greens started in North America. And for myself, there was a man named Walter Brissett, who was an elder of the Anishinaabe band at Red Cliff in northern Wisconsin. He carried...
These are Native American.
Right. The Chippewa is how they're more commonly known around the world. And he actually carried Black Hawk's warhammer. So he had a particular charge and also an incredible sense of humor, which was a dangerous weapon too. But he was one of the leaders in forming the Greens in the Upper Great Lakes, and also in taking on the mining industry, and also nuclear power in the Upper Great Lakes, got Winona LaDuke into the Greens. And I sort of came in because people from Madison, where I was living, I was growing up, were going up north to protest the mining companies, and one thing led to another.
I think it's fair to say that the original reason for being was environmental concerns, the Green Party, and then that, hence the name, perhaps, the idea of green and recycling and reviving the economy. But it has other things. But in Germany, in particular, it was against the nuclear industry as well. So you mentioned that in Wisconsin, and the native populations were concerned with the nuclear industry there.
Yeah, both in terms of long-term storage. There's been plans to try to site a long-term nuclear storage, nuclear waste storage facility in the rock there, and also just in terms of resistance to nuclear power as well, and resistance to nuclear war. There's been ongoing direct action campaigns in the upper Midwest. People have gone to prison for many years for taking on, in particular, Project ELF, which was a first strike, is a first strike communication system that the Navy has established so that the U.S. could initiate a nuclear war. So people have been resisting on all those fronts. So
besides, I mean, another basic tenet of of the Green Party movement, as I appreciate it, is anti-war or anti-intervention.
The thing that really, it's an important point to make, that really appeals to me about green politics, and has from the beginning, is that it's concerned not with a single issue. And it's really was way ahead of its time, and I think still is among political parties, in terms of linking issues of environment, basic democracy, peace, a critique of industrial society that was very advanced, and which is based in basic green principles, including feminism, including diversity and equality in various ways. It linked all the issues that I was interested in, and plus, it was global in scope. It spanned completely from very local meetings in someone's living room to global levels. It's really the only international party that is existing with any sort of visibility today. And the second great thing about it is that it's not just a political party. I think of it as a social movement. So it really was attractive and remains attractive to me for all of those reasons.
Well, I know there are successful green politicians in Central and South America, Europe, the South Pacific, of course, and Australia, New Zealand, and those countries. So that is an international. It's interesting that there's an international movement, but in the United States, it remains much more, not much more, but certainly marginal. And yet they say on the website, and by the way, anybody who's interested in this, there's a pretty nice website, Green Party USA, gp.org, and you can go on there, and it's a whole lot of this information laid out in a coherent, nicely organized way. Gives you some of the specifics about what the Green Party stands for and what it hopes to advocate. But one of the things it says on that website is that the mission of the Green Party of the United States is to build the Green Party into a viable political alternative in the United States. So the high point so far in that political alternative effort would be the fact that we had a celebrity candidate in Ralph Nader, and he got, what, 7% or?
No, 2.7, yeah, which was about 3 million votes.
Yeah, about 3 million votes nationwide. Well, I got about 4%, I think.
Right.
So,
no, you did well.
Well done.
But anyway, the point being, is there a way for an organization like the Green Party with these philosophical and ideas, including, by the way, antipathy or a prohibition on receiving large donations?
Yeah.
Is there any way for this group to break through and become a national party?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the country is not actually living in a two-party system. They're living in a one-party system. And so, you know, we were talking a little bit before the show about the race in which I ran for state assembly in my home district in Madison, Wisconsin. And you know, the reality there is that the Republicans are the third party in Madison. When the Greens run, we run serious campaigns. We hold at any one time between a third and a fifth of the city council seats. We've had presidents of the city council, the school board, et cetera. These are nonpartisan races, but everybody knows what party people are with, and they're very competitive races. And I ran in a partisan race for state assembly, got a third of the vote. Republican came in third, got a fifth of the vote. So you know, most of America is like that. It's either tilts in one direction or another. Many parts of California, you don't have competitive races for state legislature. You don't have competitive races for state office, right? So that opens up a lot of space. I think it's also important to recognize that while the Nader campaign in 2000 was the greatest visibility for the party and it really did a lot to build the party, I think our greatest successes have come at the local level around the country.
I think that's
local offices, yeah.
I believe, and I've sometimes felt frustrated that I didn't see that evidence in the national leadership belief. They sometimes seem to have an infatuation with celebrities, you know, and that does get you attention, and I understand the need for that. But I believe that we do better by working green grassroots up. You find a person that's credible on a local level, as you were in Wisconsin. Or say John Strawn, who was a green guy here who almost got on the city council and came so close. And these people prove their bona fides and their credibility, and they let you understand that they speak for issues that you care about, and you don't care so much about what their title is, especially in a nonpartisan race.
Right.
Yes.
And then later on, maybe you can elect them to something next step up. Santa Barbara, we do have a couple of Greens in office.
That's right.
Pat Hiles, whom I've known for a good many years, and the gentleman in the
Mosquito Fire District.
I just blanked on his name. We had him on the show when he was running for office, and I'm sure that our president, our interview did it, put him over the top in that campaign.
No doubt. Thank you, Glenn.
So anyway, the point is, so if the Green Party can make its presence credible on a local level, but that's only, there's some parts of the country where I don't think the Green. Let me back that up again. There's a tendency to believe that the Green Party is very, very, very left of center. And it certainly is left of the American political center in many ways, but in around the world, and then sometimes in this country, it's my opinion, I've advocated this or expressed this thought that there are some things that the Green Party finds in common with quote-unquote right-wing or conservative groups.
Or libertarians.
Well, libertarians in particular would be the most obvious. Certainly the Rand Paul attitude about American intervention overseas. Is there any chance for some type of coalition backwards? I mean, there's this, in other parts of the world, I know there are coalitions where the Greens have actually supported some conservative governments in order to get seats in government.
Well, a lot depends on the political system. You're quite right that the United States as a system, as Ben actually said, there's a second sense in which it's a one-party state. Sometimes the Greens talk about a duopoly. You've got two parties, you know, the Democrats and the Republicans, who basically are, although the Republicans have moved so far to the right that it's almost not so true anymore, but they're both parties of the 1%, parties of the corporate elite, whatever the history is, and they spend millions and millions of dollars and raise millions and millions of dollars for their political campaigns. They're beholden to lobbyists and so forth. The Greens are very, very different, and we're in a system first past the post where, you're right, our main chance for success in the system is on the local level. Around the world, where you have proportional representation, if you have a threshold of 5%, for example, to get into Congress, so you have Green parties in the parliament throughout Europe, in the European Parliament, you have an elected member of parliament in the UK, Caroline Lucas, who is the leader of the Green Party. We would have people in Congress if that was the rule, because we don't get a lot of votes because people know that that vote is not going to get somebody elected.
Although, if, one thing I would sort of put on the table is that even with the system that we have, we actually do get as many votes oftentimes in statewide elections as they get in Austria, and Germany, and so on. It's amazing to think that Peter Camejo here in California got 7 or 8% of the vote. In Wisconsin, we've gotten as much as 11% in three-way and four-way races. So you think about that, everybody who voted for those Green Party candidates knew that those candidates were not going to be elected, but they did it anyway.
That's right.
And if we were in Europe, they would have been. We would have seats from that.
Two things I want to get back to here. But let's go back to this proportional representation or cumulative voting or some other form of counting votes. And I know this is obscure, and most people glaze over immediately when you start talking about how do you count votes. But in places like San Francisco, where I think they are using some form of representational voting, Green candidates have much more chance of success.
That's right.
And other minority candidates do too.
There's two ideas. One, proportional representation means that small parties can be represented on a nationwide basis because they take a certain percent of the vote. And that's the European system, and that's healthy because it encourages many parties rather than two parties revolving around a center, which is constantly moving in a more conservative direction, at least in the United States. The second idea, independently ranked voting, IRV, it has other names, is that on a ballot you can vote for your first choice, and then your second choice, you rank who you want. And that means if you're a Green or if you're a progressive person, you can vote for the Green. And until somebody gets a majority, all the votes are considered. So once a Green candidate, say, is third, your second vote counts and starts to count for presumably a Democratic candidate. And that way you're not working against, your vote will count no matter what.
Yeah. And the person who gets elected has the support of the majority of the voters, which we don't have right now.
Well, it's clearly, it's clearly a more democratic process, difficult to attribute, but I did happen to notice that I think it was one of the sports groups, the National NBA or one of these groups has some need for their members to vote on some issues, and we're going to use a form of this kind of representational voting.
That's great.
So if you can make corporate or business America understand the fairness of this, the equity of it, maybe we can get it down to a lower
Republicans, level. That's how they choose their leadership.
Is that right?
Yeah. Go to fairvote.org. Fairvote has great resources on both proportional representation and instant runoff voting. They're a truly nonpartisan organization, and you can see where people have been able to implement these forms of voting at the local level. And it's not just in San Francisco, closer to my neck of the woods, Minneapolis and St. Paul have it. And it's made a real difference in local elections.
But I might say, I mean, maybe it's not quite fair to say it, but it does seem that in the United States, we're certainly in California and other parts of the voter process in these areas is actually moving away from this type of access and distribution and fairness. And when California now has this top two primary system, which completely eliminates the minority or the non-major parties from even being heard, essentially, after the primary, where nobody is paying attention anyway.
Except in Madison, with Ben getting ahead of the Republican, he would be on the ballot against a Democrat.
And then there's no spoiler issue. I mean, it's an interesting question for California Greens and for progressives or people who just want good government in California. In legislative districts across the state, wouldn't it be great if there was a liberal Democrat facing off against a progressive Green? And that can happen in many parts of the state if people build the organization. So that's, I think you're right. At the state level, it's really problematic in terms of what happens. But further down, there may be some opportunities. The other thing I would say is, you mentioned John Strawn, and I met him, and he is a really impressive guy. And I can tell those who are watching right now that if John had been elected to the city council in that race, your lives would be better right now. It would have made a huge difference, because you look at cities where there's even one Green on the city council, never mind 5 or 6, like in some cities. in Minneapolis, where there's a green on the city council, in Cleveland, where there's a green on the city council, in Boston, Milwaukee, where there have been. Those are the people who led the way on sick leave policies, on municipal minimum wage, on food sheds, on bringing organic food into the schools. They're the ones who are the first ones.
Clean energy.
Clean energy, you name it. Any policy that is moving forward in a progressive direction at the local level, green elected officials have been the ones to introduce it, to pioneer it. So, let's get some greens into local office here in Santa Barbara County.
Well, we have Abraham Powell, was the gentleman on the Montecito School District, and when you were discussing, it reminded me of the fire district, and reminded me of this because in the conversation we had with him, one of the things that we were discussing is whether they were going to start using solar collectors and other things to provide energy for the fire units. And then there are things, you don't think that there are really green issues in something like the fire district, but there are. Exactly what you were saying, there are on every issue. And we would have been better off if John had just gotten over that hump. But still, had we not, the top two primary system, had that existed when I was running for state office, I would never have gotten a chance to go around and make any points. Nobody would have asked me my opinion.
System.
That nobody would have said, you're a candidate, even though we know you will get a couple percentage, you have a chance to write that up in this San Francisco newspaper or that Oakland paper or the Merced or somebody. At least you get a chance to be exposed, to expose ideas that you otherwise would not have been heard about.
The problem is that in this country, we have a real battle for democracy. We have a real imperfect, to say the least, democracy. And I think in terms of, the system is so clearly organized in ways that work not against just a third party or a small party, an independent party like the Green Party. It really works against the interests of everyone. We don't have a real choice here.
It's not accidental.
And we think of that as a great democracy when, in fact, if you break it down and look at it, you see so many ways in which it's very limited. And there are much more advanced democracies around the world and many ideas that could be implemented, such as the ones we're talking about here, that would make this a much more level playing field. And then we would see the best ideas win.
I'm tempted to go, well, I will, because I'm the host and I can do this, okay? I'm going to go back and just take a few moments talking about move to amend, because I think it comes in here. This whole question of how American campaigns are financed and how much money is spent on the centrists and center-right candidates in both parties, and they're hardly distinguishable. We have the Tea Party Republicans, quote unquote, that are distinguishable, and we have some progressive Democrats that are distinguishable, but that great center is not. Give the audience about 2 minutes about what Move to Amend hopes to accomplish.
Sure. Move to Amend has been organizing around the country to amend the U.S. Constitution to make clear that corporations don't have the rights of persons and that money is not speech for the purpose of elections. And what that means is that courts that uphold the rights of corporations, the so-called rights of corporations to spend money on elections, to lobby, to lie to us, which, believe it or not, the Supreme Court has ruled, you may know this.
Well, I do know this.
In Caskey v. Nike, that Nike had a constitutional right to lie to us.
First Amendment right?
Yeah, exactly.
In Measure P last fall.
Measure P. Chevron came in and put in their millions. And so we have to amend the Constitution to overrule the court, because the federal courts are staffed with corporate lawyers, and really what they've done is they've created all kinds of obstacles to self-rule in America. So what Move to Amend is doing is they're working from the bottom up, and Liberty Tree helped to start the Move to Amend coalition. It's since become much larger effort, and people can go to movetoamend.org to find out about it. But we've been putting the question to the ballot across the country in order to build the power that will be necessary to compel an amendment, either through Congress or through constitutional convention. So my hometown was actually, in the midst of the Wisconsin uprising, we were the first to pass a resolution calling for a constitutional amendment, making clear that corporations don't have constitutional rights, that money is not speech. And our county did it. We got nearly 80% of the vote. Now it's over 500 municipalities across the country that have done it. Some states, the majority of the population has voted in favor of this amendment already.
Right. So even though it seemed hopeless at the time it was first proposed, other constitutional amendments have risen up from the people.
Sure.
The direct election of senators comes the most.
Also a Wisconsin initiative.
Yeah, Wisconsin. So we're getting toward the end, but I just want the public to know. So if you want to know more about this move to amend, which I think is probably the most incredibly important thing that's happening in American politics, if we could succeed in getting this definition reversed from the Supreme Court Citizens United case, we'd all be so much better off, and we'd have a chance for parties like the Green Party and other parties with interesting things to say to make it a more interesting political discourse in America, and maybe some more progressive and successful things.
Like John was saying, to make democracy actually real, for regular people, not just for those of us who are building parties.
And I think it's important to say that change isn't made through elections necessarily, and that there are plenty of other ways for people to exercise their power, and the Green Party certainly stands in the middle of those efforts, from Occupy to now the climate justice movement to standing with Ferguson, all kinds of issues that are amenable to change from outside the political system. And that's one of the beauties of green politics, that we're both inside and outside and completely independent.
I got an email today at home. Should I run for president? Let's talk a bit about Jill Stein. She's the candidate, the last Green Party candidate for president, and she's apparently considering running again. This is not a quote-unquote celebrity. She seems a very credible and thoughtful person. Is there opposition to her candidacy? Is there something else that would be on the table that we should know about in terms of who might be a candidate for president?
Ben's going to answer this question because I know him to have been her campaign manager. I don't know if that's the correct title, in 2012. Sure. I got to know her after the elections, and I want to say I think she's a fantastic leader for green politics in the U.S. And I want to also say that she's taken a big lead in terms of global climate justice politics. The big march on New York, 400,000 people in the street, she was very, very important, and organizations that the Greens were part of, and she was part of, like the Global Climate Convergence, which Ben is also part of. That's the kind of leadership that I really am inspired by and excited about in the Green Party.
Well, I was happy with her campaign and her position papers. You maybe have written some.
I had a hand in many of them.
And I think the public would be well served to go to that. Two things: go to GP or Green Party US or GP.org and look up some of the information on what the Green Party actually stands for, and disabuse yourself of what you might have thought before you went online and found out. Because it's, I think there's a certain sense sometimes that it's a little pie in the sky or unreal, but there's some serious down-to-earth, nitty-gritty proposals that work, and serious people who are presenting these. And then go to maybe Jill Stein's website,
which is jill2016.com,
and see what she's got to say as a candidate.
She's very popular within the party. There may be some other people. I've heard Daryl Cherney, for example, who is well-known Redwood campaigner here in California, has been talking about it. But I think what you heard from John, what we just heard from you, is a common sentiment in the party. Jill is a brilliant, very compassionate candidate. She really connects with people. She's the most studied candidate I've ever worked with. So she's she's going to do well, I think.
Thank you again for being here. We hope to have these on YouTube and Ustream, and they'll be showing again